Hey, what's good, family? Welcome to part 2 of my How I Made My Beloved. Today we're going to be talking about how I made the bass and then also how I put that into context. Now, I'm not going to really spend, because there's a lot of variations that I made on exactly how I made this bass, but I can tell you that it's the same process as all of the other bass videos that I've made. So don't worry about being left out or anything. I'm just going to kind of show you the tones that I've shaped, or the timbres that I've shaped, and then I'll show you how I've applied them in the songs. If at any point you're like, yo man, I got to know how you made that, then I can do it in a separate video, but the purpose of today's video is to kind of show you how I come up with bass lines and then how you fit those kinds of sounds into a track, if that makes sense. That being said, you can find the main basses on my song, My Beloved, on my Patreon if you so choose, but that is something that is entirely optional and not really necessary. Alright, so with that being said, like and subscribe my video and whatever, and let's go ahead and get started. Yo, this is kind of cool because this is actually the very first video or project file for the very first video that I ever put up, which is Superior Drummer and Addictive Drums on how to make neuro sounds. Cool. Anywho, trip down memory lane aside, what I generally do within this stuff is before I start a song, I will make a new project file and I will try to design all the sounds that I can possibly think of. So right here you can see I've got a bunch of different versions of drums. I usually don't do that many. That was for the video, but I have a bunch of different versions of basses. And then I also have some musical ideas that I wrote down that actually carried over into the actual song My Beloved. So you might recognize something like this progression. And then typically what I'll do is I'll throw that into a folder and then drag it out later, but we're going to talk more about that kind of stuff in the fourth and final part of this video series. So anyways, you guys are here for the bass, and let's go ahead and have a listen to some of these basses that I made. This is going to be one of the biggest chunks of the actual section of the song, so keep neuro bass F in mind. Let's go ahead and listen to how that sounds. And then that's just like a really long loop of the same thing, which stems from this bass. I can pull up Serum quickly. It's some basic shapes, 2 notches, sub. Here are the effects that I've applied. Pull that down. Last thing is OTT. And then what I've done is just added some EQ, some spatial effects, some distortion, multiband, filter on the LFO, OTT, phaser, more distortion. You guys know this process already by now if you've watched any of my other videos. Chain split between the bandpass and the clean sound. Let's see, what is this? This is just some more filtering with an LFO. Yeah, so you guys know this process already, right? You make a sound, distort it, add effects, filter it, do the same kind of processing. I have a very in-depth tutorial on how I make this kind of stuff, but just for the sake of covering my bases, no pun intended, you guys can kind of see how that chain lines up. So anyways, yeah, I've done that, and then I've bounced that out into this sound. Then from here, I've made another sound, which sounds like this. Oh, this is from the same bass, but from a sampler, which just sounds like squishy stuff, but that's coming from resampling this. And then from here, I've made a monster sound, which I think is actually this, the monster bandpass. Yeah, it's the same thing. And then I've made another variation, which is on the freeze. I actually didn't use that, so don't worry about that. But you can kind of see how from the resampling chain, right, I go from one thing to another, where these two are actually the same bass as just the audio version of it. And you'll see that whenever I make basses, I always make a copy of it in case if I ever need to go back, but again, that's something that we've talked about from before. This is some reverb stuff. Oy. And this is just kind of some texture things that I like to make from actual basses. I don't think I actually ever use that stuff, but it's kind of cool to see how I made. So then I made another one, which is bass 2, and it sounds like this. So when I first made this, I actually did not have it on that triplet. I took off the filter, I believe, or took off the LFO, Yeah, okay, so let me bypass this really quick. And I had something kind of similar to that. You'll hear it on some of this other stuff on the bass tab, I believe. And then you can kind of tell that I've just started making variations. So what I did was I actually kept this in MIDI and then changed some parameters, which you've seen me do before, like the filtering or whatever, and then made a couple of changes on this and then tried to bounce that out and try to bounce that out. So that way I come up with more variation, and that's how I got all this stuff. We're gonna go here. That's the same bass that we were making. Let's listen to this one. Just different filtering. Same thing. And then on this one, I just have 4 different instances of the same bass that's resampled but in different samplers. So you can see that this is highlighted here. There's a different section. There's a different section. And then there's a different section. But they're all doing the same pitch bend. So I kind of just picked the one that I like the best. So listen to this one. And then right here, same thing. And then right here, same thing. This is the one that I ended up using, I'm pretty sure. Regardless, you can see that I have 4 versions of the variations, and then I bounce all of those out to one section. And that was pretty much the, the synopsis of the bass design that I used. And now that I have all of this like awesome dope material, I've just kind of come over to here, and then you can see that I have all my stuff right there within arm's reach. Okay, so that is how I designed a brief description of how I designed a lot of these bass movements. Now let's go ahead and open up my beloved project, and you'll see how I've used it in context. This might take a while.
Come on, let's load it up. It's such a big project for you. Doodle-doodle-doo, gonna play on my guitar.
Okay, so if you haven't heard my song already, let's go ahead and listen to the first main section, and this is how it sounds. 3, 2, 1. Yeah, I really like that. Lots of dynamics happening, but for the most part, they are all just different sections cut up from those basses that I pulled out. So before I talk about where I put what and what goes where, let's go ahead and look at our processing for the bass. This is kind of an over-encompassing processing chain over all of the layers. I have a reverb folder right here, and then I have a sub layer right here, and then everything of course is enclosed in this section. So on here I have an EQ that's cutting out all the super lows. This is doing the God, I can never say that right. And basically when you play a higher note, it's going to be perceived as louder even though it's not. So if you kind of dip this down, then it will kind of make it seem like the levels are staying consistent. And then I've taken out some of the low mids here. I might be talking really fast. Whatever, I don't care. All right, so moving on, we have our FabFilter multiband, which I throw on just about everything. The lows are being kept where they are. This is being scooped out a little bit at that 286 hertz level. That's our low muddy mid mud mix area. A little bit of boost over at 1K, and then just a little bit of boost as well on 10K, and that's just to give it a little bit more presence. The ozone imager is something that I don't actually use really a whole lot just because it's really easy to ruin your sounds with, but I do turn this on whenever I'm listening to my bass to make sure that this stays at least +1. That way it keeps the phase cancellation, which dips when it dips lower, from happening. And usually I'm pretty okay because I have that utility that keeps the bass in mono. So you can use this as a tool to gauge, and then you can kind of help correct it a little bit with the utility if you're using stuff that has a lot of phase cancellation in it. And then finally we have a compressor that's doing the side chaining. So I have this side chaining to the main, which is the kick and snare up here. So all of this stuff just in those main sections to kind of keep everything consistent. Yeah. After that, that's pretty much it for the bass processing on the overall dynamic thing. And then everything else is just kind of little hits and bits in between. There's nothing really happening on here other than me turning down that main bass. And as far as the cuts go, this is going to be the meat and potatoes of what we're listening to. So this is the regular bass stab. And then this is the 4 versions of cut ups that I'm using to just kind of create rhythmic riffs. And all of the riffs here that I'm playing this along with kind of coincide with the drums. So this is like the reference or the call, so to speak, that kind of like fortifies that it's a new bar, that, you know, the section is beginning over again, that I play every 2 bars. And then the second bar is where I do like my variation. So this will generally be pretty consistent. And then here is where I'll add in that little bits of variation. So this should be the same thing again. And then on that second section, that's where I add in my variation. So it's kind of a neat and good way, or a solid way, to create something interesting without doing too much variation, because it's very easy when you have these huge gigantic chops of audio. Hold on, let me drag this to the side. And we look in here to try to make all of this fit within, you know, an 8-bar thing. So my advice to you guys whenever you're doing stuff is actually pick 1 bar, make a loop out of that, and then make this first bar like hella catchy. So even if this is like your starting point, like that's still pretty interesting. And even though I wouldn't just leave it there, like you can duplicate this 4 times and then add in variation on each one or something there. So this is a great strategy in order to come up with bass lines on your own. That's something that I got from Mr. Andre Butterworth, the 1-bar magic wand. Yo, this magic, for real. Take that into account, seriously. Okay, so this is the, like I said, the main thing that you're going to hear. And then from here, I have like some little hits and blips that kind of like help accentuate the rest of the bass line. But let's go ahead and look at the neuro wet. All this is a chain split, or sorry, it's a frequency split. So the lows are being left alone. The highs are here with just some reverb on the dark glue, and that's going to give it just a little bit of space. So it's on the tail reverb from what we did in the other project. There's some more reverb on this with an OTT. I'm probably taking out the lows on this EQ, and that's pretty much it. This is from the very first bass that I showed you guys. You might notice from the waveform pattern of all that stuff, I've just taken a little hit from there. And that has just a little bit of reverb on top as well. And then, let's see, where is this? This is a duplicate of this. So I've just cut this section up here. Let's listen to that together. There's a lot of stereo within this, and what I've done is duplicated this section here and then added in quite a bit of chorus and then EQ'd out everything below 300 hertz. So that way it sounds really nice, thick, and full. Because that's relatively in mono. Yeah, anything else that I'm missing? Oh, okay, yeah, before I forget, one final thing that I didn't talk about is the glitch windup, which is the pitch bend. Oh no, sorry, it's the filter section here, and this is the pitch bend that we did from those 4 riff versions. And this is pretty much it doesn't sound too much different without this rack here. But on here in this section, I have a low pass filter, and then when this is coming down, this is kind of sweeping on the higher frequency, so that way the sound still sounds full. It just adds a little bit more character to the sound, and that's kind of, you know, just one of those things I literally could probably just get away with, but I kind of wanted to do more, and yeah, you kind of get how this process goes. Nope, that's pretty much it on this section, and for the most part, that's actually most of the bass stuff. There is a sub layer that I have right here that's important to talk about, and all this is, I'll actually open up this patch, is just a sine wave with some distortion and some white noise. And all you have to do is turn on a sine wave, turn on some kind of noise oscillator, add some distortion to it, and then turn on the multiband with the gain up. And honestly, like, this is the easiest sounding Reese that you can potentially make. If I play this at a higher note, yeah, easy, easy, easy. And that's pretty much it for the most of this stuff. There might be a couple more layers that you see within the bass section, but I don't really use that a whole lot. From there, I guess I have that separate section where I am doing the final glitch, and that's just another, I guess, like another version of doing the first main section. So what I mean by that is, what I've done is I've basically copied all of the drums here and then just done another, like, redid everything. And this is kind of like that final Castlevania section. But you can tell that it's actually the same chops, so it's not really doing anything different. One cool thing that I like to point out is this, like, kind of repeating thing here. And all I've really done is just duplicated this and then made sure that these fade correctly, so that way there's no clicking. And that's really how I did that. If you have like a really solid sound that's already in audio, you don't really need to layer a sub under it. Granted, you don't do any crazy pitch bending, but so it's really not that crazy. The main thing to kind of recap on this whole idea is that you have some source sounds to go from. You can either do like one audio clip or a bunch of audio clips, and then you just start cutting stuff up and trying to make things fit. The main thing that you want to keep in mind whenever you're writing riffs is, for one, focus on rhythm first. Unless if you're doing like a melodic, you know, like a super saw lead or super saw main section or whatever, which is kind of a different world of this kind of music, and that's okay. But the main thing is that you can kind of just make these cuts align with your drums, and that will kind of get you so much further along the way. One final strategy that I want to leave you guys with that I have done in the past and sometimes still do is that if you guys are trying to force your neuro basses in and it's not working, stop. Throw it all out and make a bass line with a sub, just a solid sign. And from there, try to come up with something that's rhythmic. And once you have something that kind of sounds good, or you think that can be replaced, then that's when you can go and replace it with these neuro bass cuts. And it doesn't have to be like through an entire song. If you guys listen to some famous artists or whatever, you'll notice that for the most part, it's a sub, and then like on one hit, it will have just like that pitch bend or something. And, you know, something like that, or one of these popular, something along that line. And it, like I said, it doesn't really have to be the whole thing. It can, but it doesn't have to be. But that's pretty much all the bases. Thank you guys so much for watching my content. If you guys have any questions, or you really want to know how I made those other bases, then let me know and I'll do a separate video. But other than that, this is really how I just kind of came about this stuff. Make a lot of different kinds of bass sounds or whatever, and then try to jumble them up together and see what you can come up with. Other than that, thank you guys, and happy producing.